A man stands on a porch in rural Ohio, holding a weed eater he doesn't need to return. Behind him, in the driveway, his wife waits in the car. His daughter's in the back seat. It's an ordinary errand, a favor between friends. He knocks. No answer. He tries the door. It's unlocked. He steps inside, and that's when he starts screaming. His best friend is on the floor, not moving, not breathing. His wife runs in behind him. She sees the body. She grabs her phone and dials 911, hands shaking, while her husband collapses to his knees beside the man he claims he just found like this. But he didn't just find him. He killed him, hours earlier, and this, the weed eater, the discovery, even his own wife's 911 call, this was all part of the plan. Before I tell you how a coal miner's best friendship turned into a murder plot 10 years in the making, I hit that subscribe button, because this channel drops a new true crime case every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. Alright, let's rewind to where this all started. In 2011, David was 23 years old, living in Ohio, and doing what a lot of guys his age were doing, trying to figure out how to build a stable life. He wasn't chasing anything flashy, no dreams of Hollywood or Wall Street, just a decent paycheck, a roof over his head, and something to be proud of. And in that part of Ohio, coal mining checked every box. The pay was solid, the work was steady, and if you showed up, put in the hours, and didn't complain too much, you could build a whole life around it. So David enrolled in coal mining training classes, and by every account, he took it seriously. He showed up early, he paid attention, he didn't cut corners. On paper, David's life already looked complete. He was married, he had young kids, plus a couple of stepkids from his wife's previous relationship, a packed dinner table, a mortgage, the whole picture of small-town, blue-collar, all-American stability. If you'd asked anyone who knew him back then to describe David in one word, they probably would have said something like reliable or family man. Nobody would have guessed that within a few years, David would be sitting across from detectives, trying to explain why his phone records placed him at a murder scene. But that's the thing about secrets. They don't announce themselves. They start small, a conversation, a connection, a spark you didn't expect. And by the time you realize how far you've gone, turning back feels impossible. For David, that spark had a name, Brad. Brad showed up in that same training class, about 10 years older than David, and almost immediately, the two of them just clicked. They started grabbing food after class, hanging out on weekends, the kind of easy, low-effort friendship that forms when two people are just comfortable around each other. But the more time David spent with Brad, the more something started shifting. A kind of pull he probably hadn't planned for, and maybe hadn't even let himself think about before. And here's the part that made it complicated. Brad felt it too. What started as friendship turned into something neither of them expected, and eventually they crossed a line neither of them talked about out loud. Now, we're not here to make assumptions about anyone's identity or how they understood themselves. Sexuality is complicated, and people carry it differently. What we do know is this. David was married, with young kids and stepkids at home, and now he was also involved with Brad, secretly. Not long after, both of them finished their training and became full-fledged coal miners, and wouldn't you know it, they ended up working together too. Same shifts, same crew, which meant more time together, more opportunities to slip away, more reasons for David to disappear after work without anyone asking too many questions. At least not yet. Quick question before we keep going. Drop in the comments where you're watching this from and what time it is where you are right now. I always love seeing how far this channel reaches. Okay, back to the story. For a while, the arrangement worked. David would clock out, tell his wife he was hanging out with a work buddy, and head over to Brad's place. But eventually, that excuse started wearing thin. David was gone a lot. Evenings, weekends, and his wife started noticing the pattern. She didn't know about Brad, not really, but she knew something was going on. In her mind, the obvious explanation was another woman, so David came up with a plan. Instead of hiding Brad, he decided to bring him closer. He introduced Brad to his wife, told her Brad was his coworker, his best friend actually, and that they'd be spending a lot of time together going forward. And it worked, better than David probably could have hoped. His wife welcomed Brad in. The kids liked him. Before long, Brad wasn't just a name David mentioned, he was a fixture. Dinners at the house, family vacations, holidays split between both homes. To everyone around them, Brad was simply David's best friend, the guy who was basically part of the family now. which meant David had built himself the perfect cover. Whenever he wanted to see Brad, he didn't need an excuse anymore. He just said he was hanging out with his best friend, and nobody blinked. Not his wife, not his kids, not his coworkers. Think about the sheer nerve that takes. Not just hiding a secret, but hiding it in plain sight, sitting at your own dinner table, watching your wife pass the mashed potatoes to the man you're secretly in love with. This arrangement went on for years. Not months, years. A quiet double life, hidden inside a very public, very ordinary-looking family. But arrangements like this only work if both people are willing to keep living a half-truth forever. And Brad wasn't. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story this channel is built around. The quiet, human moments that come before the headlines. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because I promise you, this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming. Because somewhere along the way, what started as a secret arrangement stopped being enough for one of them. Years into the relationship, something in Brad started to shift. He wasn't a secret on the side anymore, not in his own heart anyway. He'd built holidays, vacations, and years of his life around David. And somewhere in all of that, he'd fallen in love. Fully, completely. The kind of love that wants a future, not just stolen evenings after work. And that's when the weight of the whole situation started pressing down on him. Because as close as Brad had gotten to David's family, he wasn't actually part of it. Not really. He was the best friend at the dinner table who went home alone. The guy on every family vacation who still didn't get to hold David's hand in public. He was living inside David's life without ever getting to live a life of his own with him. So Brad did something completely reasonable. He told David how he felt. He wanted more. He wanted David to leave his wife. He wanted them to actually build something real together, out in the open, instead of hiding behind a friendship that everyone else believed but wasn't true. And here's where it gets messy, because David did care about Brad, deeply, by all accounts. But caring about someone and being willing to blow up your entire life for them are two very different things. David wasn't ready to walk away from his marriage. He wasn't ready to have that conversation with his wife, his kids, his coworkers, his whole world. But he also wasn't ready to lose Brad. So he did what people in impossible situations often do. He lied. He told Brad he loved him too, that he was working on it, that leaving his wife wasn't a matter of if, just when. Someday, he said, just a little more time. And for a while, that was enough for Brad to hold on. But someday is a dangerous promise, because eventually, someday runs out. David kept making that same promise year after year, without ever following through. And slowly, Brad's patience wore down to nothing. By 2017, after years of waiting for a future that never arrived, Brad had reached his breaking point. So he gave David an ultimatum. Simple, direct, no more room for stalling. Tell your wife the truth or I will. For David, that single sentence detonated every carefully maintained wall he'd built. If Brad followed through, everything came crashing down at once. His marriage, his relationship with his kids and stepkids, his reputation in a tight-knit coal mining community where everybody knew everybody's business. The version of himself he'd spent years constructing, husband, father, reliable guy, would be gone overnight. David wasn't willing to let that happen. And instead of finally telling the truth, instead of having the honest, painful conversation he'd been avoiding for years, David made a different decision. If Brad was the only person standing between David and the life he'd built, then David decided Brad needed to disappear. Okay, I want to hear from you on this one. Drop a comment and tell me, if you were in David's position, backed into a corner like that, what do you think you would have done? Come clean? Or do you think the fear of losing everything can push a person somewhere they never thought they'd go? Let me know down below. I read every single one. Now here's how David's plan actually played out. David's plan was cold, and it was calculated. He would invite Brad to hang out, just like he had 100 times before. Nothing unusual, nothing that would raise a single red flag, and then he would kill him and make it look like Brad had simply been the victim of a burglary gone wrong. So he set it in motion. David sent Brad a text, said he missed him, said they should get together at Brad's place the next day. For Brad, there was nothing suspicious about that message at all. This was David, his David, the man he'd loved for years, the man who'd finally have to face the truth soon, one way or another. So he said yes. The next day, David showed up at Brad's house exactly like he said he would. We don't know every detail of what happened once he got inside, But at some point, David pulled out a pistol, and he shot Brad. More than once. Brad died there, in his own home, at the hands of the one person he trusted most. Then David moved to phase 2 of the plan. He needed the scene to tell a different story than what actually happened. So he started tearing the house apart, pulling open drawers, emptying closets, scattering things around like a burglar had ransacked the place looking for valuables. But he didn't take anything. Not a single item. Once he was satisfied the scene looked convincing enough, David left. He went home, like nothing had happened. But he wasn't finished yet, because David had one more move to make, and it might be the coldest part of this entire story. Hours after the murder, David came up with an idea. He remembered he still had a weed eater he borrowed from Brad a while back. So he told his wife and daughter they should swing by Brad's place and return it. Just a normal errand, a small favor between friends. So the three of them climbed into the car and drove over. When they walked inside, they found Brad's body exactly where David had left him hours earlier. And David, the man who had pulled the trigger, reacted like anyone would if they'd just stumbled onto their best friend's murder. Shock, panic, grief that looked completely real. His wife, horrified, called 911. Take a second and sit with that. David didn't just fake his own reaction. He brought his wife and his young daughter along to discover a murder he'd committed himself, using them, without their knowledge, as living proof that he couldn't possibly be the killer. Who stages a scene like this and then invites their own family to walk into it? Police arrived shortly after, and based on the state of the house, the ransacked drawers, the scattered belongings, it looked at first glance exactly like David wanted it to look. Gone terribly wrong. For a while, it seemed like David's plan was going to work perfectly. But investigators are trained to look past the surface. And pretty quickly, something about this burglary started bothering them. The house was torn apart, sure. Drawers open, closets emptied, the classic signs of someone searching for valuables. But nothing valuable was actually missing. No cash gone, no jewelry gone, nothing that a real burglar would have bothered ransacking a house for. That inconsistency was enough to change the entire direction of the investigation. Detectives concluded this wasn't a robbery at all. It had been staged, which meant Brad's murder likely wasn't random. It was planned. Someone wanted him dead and wanted it to look like something else. So police started digging into Brad's life. They interviewed his friends, his coworkers, his family. They tried to figure out if he had any enemies, any conflicts, any reason someone would want him gone. And they came up with nothing. No obvious suspects, no clear motive, no leads that went anywhere. Weeks went by, then longer, and as far as the investigation was concerned, David, the grieving best friend who discovered the body, wasn't even on the radar. It was starting to look like whoever did this had gotten away with it completely. Until someone who knew Brad better than almost anyone else refused to let the case go cold. Brad's cousin was devastated, and unlike the investigation which had stalled out completely, she wasn't ready to accept that his killer might never be found. So she started thinking back, replaying her last conversations with Brad, looking for anything that might matter. And then she remembered something. The day Brad died, he'd mentioned to her and the rest of the family that he was planning to spend the next day with his romantic partner, someone he'd been with for years. But Brad had never told them who that person actually was. He'd only ever referred to him by 2 letters, DJ. For years, that was the extent of what Brad's family knew. A nickname, no last name, no face, no real identity attached to it. Just DJ, the person Brad loved, kept private, and apparently was still keeping private even in death. But now with Brad gone and no suspects in sight, that nickname suddenly mattered a lot more than it ever had before. So his cousin started digging. She went through Brad's social media, looking for any thread that might connect back to this mystery person. A comment, a tag, a photo, anything. And eventually she found it. DJ wasn't just some anonymous initials. DJ stood for David Jr., and once she put the pieces together, she realized exactly who that was. David, Brad's coworker, Brad's best friend, the man who'd been at Brad's side for years and sat at family dinners, gone on vacations with them, and stood in that house the day the body was found. She brought what she'd discovered straight to police, and that changed everything. Detectives went back and took a much closer look at David, this time as a suspect, not a grieving friend. They pulled his phone records, and those records placed him at Brad's house, right around the time of the murder. Then they went through his messages, And that's when the years-long secret relationship between David and Brad finally came into full view. It was all there. The years of hiding, the promises, the ultimatum, a motive laid out in black and white. Police arrested David. The case that followed exposed the whole story to the public. The secret decade-long relationship, the staged burglary, the family that had welcomed Brad in without ever knowing the full truth. David stood trial for Brad's murder, and based on the phone records, the messages, and the physical evidence tying him to the staged crime scene, the jury reached its verdict: guilty. David was sentenced to life in prison. The man who had spent years constructing an elaborate double life, juggling a marriage, a secret relationship, and eventually a murder disguised as a robbery, ultimately couldn't outrun the 2 letters his own boyfriend had used to protect him, even in his final days: DJ. The nickname meant to keep David's identity hidden ended up being the exact thread that unraveled everything. What gets me most about this case isn't the murder itself, it's everything that came before it. Years of dinners, vacations, holidays, a family that genuinely loved Brad, never once suspecting the truth sitting right at their table. Let me know in the comments what part of this story caught you most off guard. Was it the secret relationship, the staged crime scene, or the fact that his own wife and daughter were brought along to find the body? If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. Every week I bring you cases just like this one, the quiet human stories that come before the headlines you think you already know. And if you want to see just how far this community reaches, drop a comment telling me what the weather's like where you're watching from right now. Thanks for watching.